So, welcome back, everyone, to episode 2 of the Molding You podcast. I'm Jonathan Dickler, mold lawyer and mold assessor, and I'm honored to be joined by Kristina Baehr of Just Well Law. How are you, Kristina?
Good. I'm here.
Great. Glad you're here. So, the podcast is about manifestation, motivation, mentorship, and of course, the double entendre molding you, about how mold was pretty much involved in our journeys. So can you tell the world a little bit about what brought you to where you are?
Well, I was poisoned at home and I didn't know that. So I was sick for years and couldn't figure it out. And I went to doctor after doctor after doctor. And I had spent some time in Africa and, maybe it was West Nile disease. Maybe it was malaria, right? I got a battery of tests. I mean, everything under the sun. Did I have cancer? Did I have Lyme disease? And finally, they sent us to go quarantine at home during COVID. And I really hit the wall. And by that point, I had quit my private firm job. I had taken a government job. I had every other Friday off. I was already gluten-free and sugar-free and dairy-free and exercising all the time. I was doing all of the things to be healthy, and I was just getting sicker. And finally, someone gave me a mycotoxin test, and the score was through the roof. And that was Dr. Picardo of Resilient Health. She saved her life. Score was through the roof. She said, go test your house. And I was so ignorant. I said, test for what? What are we talking about? I mean, it was not on my radar that your house could make you sick, and certainly not as sick as I was. So that led me on this journey to where I am now.
Yeah, it's always a sad story with mold, but I think it tends to turn into something more beautiful at the end of the day. And yeah, I think COVID really kicked this into high gear, the mold thing, because everybody's home now. Even now in 2025, almost 26, people are still working from home. And now we're seeing it with every celebrity. And like everyone's dealing with mold right now. But I like how you said that the house was actually making you sick, which is unfortunate. But it's not really just the mold, but it's actually the house which has allowed the mold to grow. And if you don't fix that problem with the house, you can get rid of the mold all you want, and the mold is going to come back. And I've met so many people through you and through social media that are involved in mold and that are really changing the game, where you can't just call the mold testing guy off Google or some lawyer that has never seen a mold case before. So can you talk about Just Well Law, which is such an inspirational indoor environmental law?
Yeah. So I was sick. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then we found the answer and we moved out of our house. And at that point, I was so incredibly sick. I had a tumor. I couldn't get my heart rate to stop. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was anemic. I had internal bleeding. I collapsed and was rushed to the hospital more than once. It was scary. And I also didn't know if there was an end to it. I mean, what was going to happen next? Was I going to get cancer? Was I going to die? I mean, I was really at the end of myself. And I started building a case against the builder of my house, right? Because we learned that the roofer hadn't flashed the chimney. And I later learned it was knowing. Would I say it's intentional? Sort of. The roofer hadn't flashed the chimney. And what has to happen is, as the mason is building the chimney, the flashing is supposed to go in between. And the roofer told my builder and told the foreman, the mason finished the chimney without me. So I didn't flash it. It's not flashed. We need to redo it. And they told him, just rig it. So as a result, there was flashing that wasn't through flashing as required, and water had been going into my daughter's wall for 8 years. Well, it turned out that was just the tip of the iceberg, and there were a whole host of problems wrong with that house. But in my view, I was doing personal injury defense at the time for the United States, and I thought, if there's ever a case, this is it. I mean, this is clear negligence. The breach of a standard of care causes harm. Here's 6 affected people. My son was regressing in developmental milestones. My daughter had become violent. My other 2 kids were also sick. Everyone was sick. And I started building a case. And I saw that there's just a tremendous need for this kind of lawyer in the world, and this kind of case. And, I couldn't even get a lawyer in Texas to call me back. A personal injury, I should say a personal injury lawyer. I had a great lawyer, but a personal injury lawyer who would do it on contingency. The lawyers who had done mold cases, the personal injury cases back in the day, wouldn't even return my call. And there was a guy here in San Antonio who did wrongful death cases. And I found that guy and I reached out to him and, really nice email. I'm Kristina Baehr. I'm a lawyer. Could I just take 15 minutes of your time? No response. Not even from a paralegal. And I thought, you have to die to get representation in this field? You know what? You take all the dead people and I will start a little law firm and I will help the people who are still alive. And that's what I did. So we built a personal injury firm we couldn't find. CNBC did a story on our family around that time, linked to our brand new website. I got 1,000 calls. So this little law firm that was just supposed to be for 1 or 2 people ended up representing thousands of people, including thousands in Hawaii, where the government had contaminated their water with jet fuel. So we were just off to the races, and we're 4 years in and we're, trying to catch our breath because it has been a race ever since. It was not the lifestyle firm I anticipated. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I was just telling someone it was Pearl Harbor, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just telling someone this story the other day and they're like, wow, there's still jet fuel from when we got attacked in World War II. I'm like, no, this is new jet fuel.
Right.
And they were lighting their water on fire with matches. And that's just insane how you're going up against the biggest force in the world.
But when you're sick and you're mad and you see other sick people, it doesn't matter. I mean, there was nothing that was going to stop me from speaking the truth in that case. I just got on Facebook and on Instagram, and anyone who would listen, I got in every podcast. I got in before every news outlet, and I said the people there were poisoned. The Navy poisoned them. There has to be accountability. People are sick. They need medical care right now. And I just started speaking out. And I had a great mentor, Jim Moriarty. I know you want to talk about mentorship. Jim Moriarty took my call. And Jim Moriarty is just this incredible lawyer who really cares about military families. And his son died in combat. And he's just a force of nature. And he said, Kristina, get angry. Show you're angry. Because that's what your clients want to see right now. They need to see someone reflecting their anger out loud. And that's what I did. And, I called him and I said, should I run some advertising? He said, how much money is in your bank account? I said, maybe 10 grand. He was like, get your head out of your ass. You don't have any money for advertising? Issue a press release. And so everything I did with a press release. And so every filing, every notice was with a press release, and I would just get out in front of the media. And, there were other lawyers circling, but people who had hired those lawyers, saw what I was doing and said, I want that. I want that. I want someone who's actually out there speaking about this. That's what this is about. In the end, the money is, it's important. We need to get money for our clients. But the process is as important as the compensation.
Right. Listening to them, hearing them. And at the Safe Housing Collaborative, I know you had some of your clients talking about, like, I don't care if we won or not. Like, I wanted Kristina to be up there representing. And it's so interesting. I got into environmental law for a number of reasons. I always loved animals and I wanted to save the world and all that. But I was actually diagnosed when I was 12 with type 1 diabetes out of nowhere, not genetic, really nothing. And they said basically this could be environmental is what they told me. Oh. And I remember writing on my law school essays like climate change, air pollution, like this is making the world sick.
Yeah.
And now, I got into mold testing like almost as just like a job. And then, it became something much bigger to where we can help people. But I feel like nobody ever, I might have even coined the term, an indoor environmental law, which is arguably, this is affecting more people than the outdoor stuff, because everyone's in their home, especially with COVID. And just thinking about how, like, our military, especially, arguably the most important thing we have is our military. And, you know, how do you even, it's scary going up against the government.
Well, I had a very big advantage, which is that I had just been working for the United States. I was just an AUSA. Remember when I said I got sick, I was already a government lawyer. I'd already quit my big firm job and taken the government job, right? So I was doing personal injury defense for the United States. So I knew how to bring a case against the United States. And I thought, this is not hard. This I can do. You know, the Texas state court cases were way harder than the FTCA case in Hawaii, because I know how to do that. I know how to do federal court. I know how to do complex litigation. I'm sick myself, so I know how to do that. I know how to do a case against the United States because I've done that. So it didn't seem at the time to be that hard. Now, there were the harder things were, how do you represent 7,000 people and keep them happy and informed? And how do you be the lawyer you wanted to have for 7,000 people? And I think that we were able to do that, but it took a lot of growth.
Yeah. And would you agree that mold is, I mean, you've seen so much environmental stuff, like the Palestine derailment, the jet fuel in the water. But I'm genuinely thinking, I mean, we know mold is causing horrible symptoms, brain, body, cancer, autism, whatever. I mean, literally almost anything could be from mold, inflammation. Are you thinking mold is easily, like, to me, this is something everyone is dealing with because it's in every house. Like, this is one of the biggest, like, to me, it's not just a personal injury issue, but it's like an environmental law issue. And we don't have like EPA standards. Like, there is some, but a lot of discrepancy.
I don't agree that it's everywhere. I think it's a huge problem, but I don't agree that it's everywhere. It's a question of degree. So when you have universities turning a blind eye to mold in their dorms and mold proliferates for years, then you have a problem. That's where you cross a threshold. But if you take a position that mold is everywhere, you don't have that moral high ground in that case, right?
Yeah. Well, I agree with you that it's about degree. So to finish the thought, there is some level of mold, most likely, I think, in most buildings, but not to the level of a health concern, and some of which would be naturally there versus someone negligently caused this to a degree where you could have a lawsuit. So I think really that's a great discussion to have. But you know, we're seeing a lot of things now. Well, 70, 80, 90% of buildings have it, but it's like, is that number really accurate? And I mean, I'm a mold assessor, so when I go into buildings, I always find it, which may be biased because people are calling me for that. But I would love somebody to find me a building that doesn't have it and bring me in.
But you know what Josh Rishal says in response to that is that you don't call a plumber if there's not a leak. So
right.
The plumber's job is to come in and find the leak when they've been called.
Right.
But a good mold assessor like you or Josh or others is not called unless there's a problem. And then they identify where the problem is coming from.
Yeah, not necessarily. I've been called by people who say, I don't think I have any mold. I'd just like to have my house checked. And there is always mold.
Where, in that particular case, where did you find it?
Multiple places, but usually, I mean, I'm from Florida, so the AC unit is usually culprit. Even in the cleanest, best places, AC unit. And I think in other places like drier climates, there could be another story, but what are the chances there's no plumbing leak or washing machine mold or refrigerator mold? So I understand that it's shaky ground to say. I don't think anyone's out there saying every building has mold, which is something I am 100% willing to say. And if it creates a new, argument for legal cases, then that's something to be, discussed like we are. But I just think it's, like you said, mold is not everywhere, but we're looking for major moisture problems. I mean, that's what's causing all these things. So I think it's really important to talk about. And I really appreciate your feedback. But I do have an open challenge to anybody who says I can't find mold in their building. Does it mean it's going to make you sick and lead to these horrible things? No. And only, we see that it's usually only select people who are really having major exposures but I mean, I'm a firm believer that it's in the White House, it's in the Congress buildings, it's in our military housing. I mean, I've also seen it from the inside out with social media and just being alive in Florida. It's in every school, it's in every apartment I've ever been in, it's in every home I've ever been in. I think it's a major environmental exposure that people are overlooking. That doesn't mean there's mycotoxins in every home. And, I think it's a really important points you bring up. I think it's great how you guys are handling these mold cases, and a lot of them end up settling, right? Is that mostly the trend, or do a lot of them?
I mean, we're willing to go to trial. We went to trial on a case in the most conservative county in Texas, and we won. In that case, there were, the family was not super sick, but they wanted to take a stand against this landlord that was causing really bad conditions. And they recognized that, while they got better when they moved out, the woman with cancer down the street, or the woman with autoimmune issues, or the kid with developmental delays, those are people who are really vulnerable. So this family took a stand for all of them and took on the case against the landlord. And this very conservative jury in a very conservative county found liability for $1 million. And it was really interesting because in that case, I said, what's it going to take for this landlord to stop? And that particular landlord had 101 million under management and in residential housing units. And we said, what's it going to take for him to start paying attention? And that was their answer, $1 million. It was a $1 million verdict. The guy ended up declaring bankruptcy, and he declared bankruptcy to get out of the judgment because he just disagreed with the judgment. And the property has value. It's a sham bankruptcy. We're, contesting the bankruptcy. We're in the bankruptcy court as a creditor, and we're going to get paid, I think, the full amount because it's a sham bankruptcy. But that's what's happening. These landlords are turning a blind eye to the conditions in their properties, and they're making people very, very, very sick. So the question is not really what, is there mold? It's a question of what do we do about it when water damage is reported? Or because there's going to be water damage, there are going to be leaks, there's going to be floods. And the question is, what is the landlord going to do? Is the landlord going to come in and put a fan on it? And I had a great case where this poor woman and she just gotten divorced, and she was moving in with her little girl, and it was in a good school district. And she was zoned for, the elementary school, which was right nearby, but she was on the ground floor, and the sewage kept leaking. Toilets kept overflowing, which they basically told her, oh, sorry, that happens on the first floor. Well, I mean, that was their excuse. Yeah, it just happens. And their solution was to come and put a fan on it. So don't worry, we'll come and put a fan on it. So I got that lady a deposition, the management, property manager, and I said, ma'am, is sewage toxic? She said, well, define toxic. What is toxic? I said, does sewage have contaminants? Well, yeah, I guess so. Well, if you put a fan on contaminants, is it going to blow the contaminants into the air? Well, I guess so. Now that we've had this conversation, will you ever put a fan on sewage again? Maybe not. Ma'am, now that we've had this conversation, Would you spend a single night in Miss Davis's apartment? No. Case closed, right? Case closed. Because they often don't even think about it. And, Graystar admitted at deposition that they don't use the word mold. Most of these companies, Lend-Lease, same thing. They have a company policy not to use the word mold. One military housing company has a policy that instead of the word mold, they have some number, say 1529 or whatever it is. That's their code. And so in all the maintenance records, it's 1529, 1529, 1529, because they don't want to use the word. Well, if we're not using the word as landlords in the country, then certainly we're not hiring professional assessors or professional remediators or addressing the problem at all. So the danger to our country is extreme because you have mold proliferating in all of those landlord-owned buildings. And it's especially bad when they're owned by private equity and investment firms because they have just the incentive, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes. Every incentive is just to turn over those units and they don't care. They don't care about, the health or the property they don't even care about the property.
Yeah, it's a horrible thing. And I see it a lot with not just renters, but homeowners. But I think a lot of times the bigger the building is, kind of the harder it falls in a lot of ways. And these renters, especially have you barely have control over your own place, let alone your 200 neighbors. And it's really just, it's such a big problem, but people do have rights. And a lot of people don't even know that there's mold lawyers, and they're like, who would I even call? And can I even get out of my lease? But there's so many levels to it. But I'm still fixated on how, going up against the military and the US government is such a big deal. And I know there's a lot of backlash. People are like, how could you go against our government? But I like what you said about who wins.
Yeah.
I mean, I steal all your lines.
Okay, good. Who loses if we win? Who loses if we win? Let's take the case against the United States Navy. Who loses if we win?
Nobody.
Well, your first reaction is to say, well, the Navy. Really? How does the Navy lose? Because ultimately it's about incentives. And next time, the Navy's going to think twice before contaminating the water and then not telling people not to use it. Because that's what happened. The Navy contaminated the water and then issued a statement saying there's no indication the water is not safe, which is what all these companies do, right? These institutions. If there's no test, they can say there's no indication it's not safe. So that's what they did in this scenario. They issued a statement. They said there's no indication it's not safe. And in fact, the base commander had a glass of water, drank it, and he said, my men and I are drinking it.
Yikes.
And that was on a Friday. Over the course of the weekend, thousands of people, more than 7,000 people, had medical encounters for acute poisoning symptoms, according to the Navy's own data. It was completely preventable. And in so many of these scenarios, that's what we're dealing with. It was completely preventable. And that's what the legal system is for. It's to prevent the preventable. It's to change the incentives. It's to say, next time, you got to warn us. The first rule is the government must provide safe water. Second rule is if the government contaminates the water, it must let us know right away to protect all of us, right? And those are basic rules. Anyone on the planet would agree with those two things. So if those rules are violated, there has to be a consequence. And the consequence protects us, protects all of us, and protects the institution. Because now that institution is going to be better. Their people are going to be healthier. It's going to be safer. Now, the challenge that I have is that the law has two purposes. One is to compensate people, compensate those who have been harmed. And then the other is to deter bad conduct. Well, in my view, the compensation has to be enough to deter the bad conduct. Because if it's not enough, it can be perceived as just a slap on the wrist. So we have to continue to pursue damages in these cases that are serious on an individual basis. And too often the judges or the juries or the, companies or in mass torts really discount it on a per person basis. Well, 10 grand a person or 5 grand a person or 500 a person or something. And that's insane when you think about this person who's been poisoned, right? But it's because there's so many that there's this group accounting thing that's going on. And my firm, Just Well, continues to focus on the clients and on the people. And these are not numbers. These are real people who were really harmed by this institution. And when we go forth, that's what we're going to continue to do in these cases, is portray the harm, the real harm, and continue to advocate for higher numbers, because it can't be like Norfolk Southern and East Palestine, just, 600 million, just another day in the park for them. That was actually their policy limit. So, okay, just, tender the policy. It can't be just a tender the policy situation. We have to go beyond the policies in these cases.
And that's 600 million for how many people? For a lot.
Tens of thousands of people. Yeah.
It brings me back to good old Zoom law, where I did law school during COVID. And they asked, speaking of wrongful death, what's the value of a human life? And you get people saying 10 million, 10 billion. I could still tell you right now, I would not take 10 billion to die. I mean, what is the number? And it's safe to say people lose their lives to mold. I mean, I've seen it. I assume you have seen that in your cases. But it's like you say, how can you ever compensate someone, even if it's not, the end of their life, but the end of them being able to do normal things?
Well, you can't take that approach with a jury either. You got to be really careful, because you have to empower the jury to do something. So if you take this attitude, which I disagree with, and you can put this on air, if you take this attitude that mold is everywhere, that doesn't empower the jury to do anything about it. That sucks. I mean, I guess it's at my house. Oh, well. That's a different scenario than there is this university that is putting these freshman girls in Johnston Hall year after year after year, knowing full well that those freshman girls are going to get sick, and they're going to go to the emergency room, and they're going to have asthma attacks, and they're going to show up at Human Health. That's poisoning. And I don't use that word lightly. That's the intentional infliction of bodily harm. Bob calls it assault. Bob will actually put assault in his cases, because that's what that is. I call it poisoning. My clients call it poisoning. Bob calls it assault. It's intentional. At that point, it becomes intentional. And that's what we have to do something about. That's the willful blindness. That's the intentional harm that is happening all over our country. And there are families who are standing up and saying, not on our watch, not again. We're not. Every one of my clients is doing it, bringing a case, because they don't want it to happen again. They're all saying, not on my watch. It has to stop. And, it's not unlike crime. I'm a survivor of something that happened to me when I was a kid, and I wasn't able to testify against the person who harmed me. But other girls did testify about him, and he went to jail. And there's bravery in coming forth in court and using the justice system to enforce the rules. That's what the justice system is for. And the same is true on the civil side. Our clients aren't greedy, they're brave, because they're coming forth and they're saying, we need to enforce the rules so that these bad guys don't do it again. And by the way, not every company is bad. It's not like I'm saying that they're all bad. Again, who loses if we win? The institution, Sewanee University, is a great school. UVA, great school happens to be poisoning their freshmen. I don't want a great school poisoning its freshmen. I want that great school to do better. I want Sewanee to do better. And they will do better because we're going to hold them accountable and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Super important. And I will say, I think mold is not growing everywhere. So hopefully that helps. And I'm sure the defenses bring that up. Oh, there's mold everywhere, which we're on the opposite side. But I think, we talk about motivation, which is hard enough as it is. But then you're actively trying to motivate people to face the most traumatic experience of their life against the US government in front of court reporters. So we can talk about motivation, but how do you motivate someone to do the most hard thing that they'll ever think about doing in a million years?
I was on this town hall this week with some partners, and the partners told my clients, don't worry, we settle 95% of our cases and you probably won't ever have to testify. And I wanted to jump through the screen and wring their necks because that's not how I practice law. Not that we don't settle claims. We absolutely do. If it's enough, we settle the claim. But I'm telling my clients, I hope you get to testify. I hope you have the honor of participating in this system that is designed to protect all of us. What a beautiful country we live in that has entrusted public safety to civil juries, to juries of our peers. It's the people that get to enforce the public safety rules in our country. And we get to be a part of that. And our clients are brave to bring the claims, and we're brave to litigate them. And we get to be part of a beautiful system. Don't get me wrong, it's broken in some ways. It's not like the justice system is perfect. But I think its design is perfect. I think it has a divine purpose. I think it's meant for good in the world. And I think our country has a particularly special role for the civil system because in Europe, they did not have a civil jury system. They only had a criminal jury system. But here we said, no, we want this to be adjudicated by the people too. So it's not hard for me to empower our clients to go up and speak because they're already empowered. They're the ones who came, they found us. It's not easy to find us. They found us, they went through intake, they got us all their documents, they participated in the process. I mean, they've gone to a lot through by the time they get to their deposition. And I get to say, now it's your turn. Now you get to look in that camera or look at that jury, at that judge, and you get to tell them the truth. And the truth is always on our side. We always come in with the truth because I wouldn't take a case where we didn't. So we always come in with the truth. And what an honor to get to speak truth in the justice system. That's a gift.
Yeah, and it's so important how you talk about bravery. Not just the lawyer has to be brave, but the person has to be brave. And, I've done Instagram for so long and TikTok and all the social media. Like every time someone comments, I'm like, thank you for bravely sharing your story. Because it doesn't have to be going up against the US government. It could be as simple as making some content or telling someone about mold. But I think people are scared that they don't want to be called, oh, you're crazy for talking about mold. But it's so important that we do. And now like celebrities are really talking about it a lot. But I've seen like with the Safe Housing Collaborative, like you're taking on the mentor position now of starting this army of mold attorneys or environmental personal injury attorneys. And I feel like we almost need to mentor the government now on how to make safe legislation. Like we had the Clean Air Act. So why don't we have the Clean Indoor Air Act?
Well, there are groups working on that. So there is is it Safe?
Change the Air?
Change the Air Foundation. I always get it wrong. The Change the Air Foundation. Good friends leading that, Michael Rubino. And so there are groups doing that. We've already submitted a proposal to the U.S. government, to this administration. And I believe that there are people in the administration who care about this issue and want to move it forward. I'll settle for, let's just get consistent as a government about what mold does to us. And I'm very encouraged by that the NIH, by the way, this was happened in the last administration, not this one, but in the last administration, finally revised their information to show that mold does cause cognitive harm and immune dysfunction and cancer. And to me, that was incredibly important because for a long time, the government was taking the position that mold is just causes asthma. And by the way, asthma can be incredibly debilitating. So I'm not poo-pooing asthma. It's just that mold also causes brain damage and mold also causes cancer. And if we don't recognize the extent of the harm, then we can't ever recognize the extent of the problem, right? And the remediation that has to happen, the importance of the immediate reaction. We have to treat it like it's an emergency when water damage happens. We need to show up and do something about it to prevent this harm that can make people really sick. So I want to encourage the government to continue to speak truth about what mold actually does to the body so that we can recognize the harm and come up with solutions. You know, I applaud this administration for what they're doing with safer housing. They care about military housing. They're the cases we have are not against the US government. They're against the privatized housing companies. And there are congressional leaders and there is this administration. There are people who are working to address the housing conditions for our military. It's going to be a long road. The solution is not obvious, but for the love of God, finally we have someone who cares. And look, whether we're red, blue, or purple, I don't care. I will work with anyone who is going to help our clients and help address these issues in the United States. Military housing in particular has to be a bipartisan issue. We cannot be mission ready if our people are sick. So we have to be taking steps as a country together. And, same with our schools and our universities. We can't have an economy and grow scholars and grow business leaders. And if our kids are sick at school, they're coming in as freshmen and they're ready to learn and we're destroying their brains in their dorm. It is a tragedy and it's everywhere. That is universal. The university dorms are a universal problem and it's going to have to be addressed in every single school that I can think of.
I know we're getting close to the end, but we talk about brain damage and I think nobody ties that into like autism, which is one of the main reasons I do what I do every day is because we see autism or something like it completely going away when we get rid of the mold. And I also think that internationally, there's got to be something done because I have contacts in Malaysia, Peru, India, China. There's no mold industry there at all. Yet these places have 100% humidity and there's so many people suffering. But I like to leave the audience with something motivational in a mentorship style. And I feel like you're the perfect person to leave them with something, probably for the person who's listening, who's either in mold or is just in some other way is just kind of stuck and hopeless and has no idea what they want to do.
One word for those who are stuck or in a really dangerous situation, whatever that is, your job today is to make it through the next 5 minutes. That's all you need to do. You need to breathe and make it through the next 5 minutes. You can do that. If you can, get out for a day, a week. Let your mind clear so that you can continue to do the next right thing. When you're in the moldy environment, your brain is clouded. It's very hard to make good decisions. I've spoken to many parents who tell me, Kristina, my kids have been hospitalized 3 times and I'm worried they're going to die. And I say, well, you're out of the house, right? Well, no. I mean, that is a parent that has a foggy brain. Because if your house is killing your kid, you got to get your kid out of the house, right? And it's a matter of degrees. Not every house is killing every kid. I'm not saying that. But I have spoken to parents who, they've been warned by a doctor that their kid's going to have an allergic reaction, that it's life-threatening. A newborn recently, one of our clients had a newborn, brought the newborn back to the moldy place, right? Because there's nowhere else to go. The military isn't getting paid during this shutdown. You got to clear your head well enough to make the right choices in the emergency, because what you might be in an emergency, and that's okay. You can do that. You can just keep breathing and making it through the next 5 minutes. And you can do this. You can get well. You can get to safety. You're just going to need to be strategic about it. And in order to be strategic about it, you need your brain. So get out, clear your brain, keep going.
Right. And don't go to a place that is even moldier. Go to a cleaner place, which is easier said than done. But if you're in a really bad place, most places are going to be better, probably. But even if we're not talking about mold, I like how you say get out or take 5 minutes to clear your head. And I was someone who I never really believed in meditation much because I could never do it. But now that I can do it, it's like that's the most important step is before you make a huge life decision, get out of the cell phone, get out of your head, go outside and get out of your head so you can make a decision. But that's so important. I mean, that's life-saving advice for people. And like you said, every day counts when we're talking about brain damage, cancer.
I have a client who died at 31 in the house I told her to leave. And let me tell you why. She believed it was the HVAC problem and it was the HVAC company's fault and they should come and fix it. Those are all true. That HVAC company was not coming. So I think a lot of people get stuck in their head, right? Thinking, well, it's the military, right? The company, the military, their job is to provide us with safe housing. The military's job is to provide us with safe housing. So they need to come and make it right, and that is true. They do need to come and make it right. And you actually can't afford sometimes to stay. And I get a lot of flack for that. Right. But I have a client who moved to a tent in his backyard and he felt a lot better. So, again, it's always a question of degree. You don't have to get out tomorrow. You can make a plan. You can be strategic. You can clear your brain and make a good plan. It's not always tomorrow that you need to leave. Like let's come up with an exit plan, but prioritize your own health first.
Yeah, put your own oxygen mask on first. And I think people struggle with the idea that in a lot of ways, you're the only person that's really responsible for you, that's really looking out for you. And you have to make decisions that are, even if you want to protect your family and your kids and your parents, it starts with you and you really have to take fast action. That's what I say. Do something. Not just relevant for mold or jet fuel, but also toxic relationships, toxic addictions. You should get out ASAP so that you can be the best version of yourself. It's not just an environmental issue, but this applies to anything. Take fast action and you're the only one who's going to be able to make that change.
In health, I think a lot of people think they can't afford to leave. And that is true. There are bad choices here. Sometimes you can't afford to stay. And again, it's a question of degree and what's going on in your life and what your options are. But if you can't work, then you will have no financial well-being. So I think sometimes people don't think about it in terms of, if I stay, I'm affecting my earning power because I'm going to get sicker and sick people can't work. And I thought by the time I left, I thought I was so sick that I'd never be able to work again. And my prayer for my clients is also, may you get well enough to help others. That's my hope and my prayer for people listening to. May you get well enough to help others. you may not never get all the way well. I don't think I'm all the way well. But I got well enough to help other people. And what I lost in brain power, I gained in empathy. And now I have this gift of getting help to help people. And it's a gift and it's an honor. And I'm going to keep doing it. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here.